You spray them with Lysol spray. You give them a hearty speech. You go tell your friends never to come back here.
You leave the dead right there as a warning.
Next day
they just
back.
get picked up and fresh recruits come in.
Preferably in a residential area.
So in this one, it's a biography about Hannibal. It's talking about, so the beginning of it talks a little bit about his father in the First Punic War. It kind of sets the stage for Hannibal to become an adult, to become a general, the one that we all know. And then the middle of the book kind of talks about all of his exploits as a commander. And then the end of the book covers his life and the end of his life. So I like this book because it was very factual and methodical. It wasn't exciting because it doesn't really get into the battles all that much. It explains them kind of step by step. I like this book overall, but what I didn't like is that historians did not capture Hannibal very well. So there's not a lot of information to go off of. So the author does his best to bring out all of the details that we do have, come to some conclusions, but it's kind of dry, but still interesting. And I think regular readers of history will enjoy it.
Oh yeah. Yeah, and the author definitely did a really good job because he had a lot of sources, other books that he references, and he keeps talking about 3 different sources at the time that have their own feedback on Hannibal, right? Yeah. One was a Roman.
Yeah, I think one was a Roman. Look, first thing to know about us, don't ask us to give you dates. We mess up names all the time. We are not historians. We're 2 dudes that like to read history books, and we don't have very good memories.
So 3 different sources, and I think some were anti-Hannibal, one were pro-Hannibal, and the other one was kind of neutral.
So it's unfortunate because Hannibal seems to be a very interesting character. Yeah. And I wish we had so much more details about him because pretty much everything we know about him is just from the Romans, which were his enemies and had to fight him. So we're getting told about this great general from his enemies. And a lot of the book is also about Rome at the time, right? We get to learn about a lot of Roman commanders, Rome, his government, and the problems it was facing. The author leans on that a little too heavily, seeing how this is a Hannibal biography. Yeah. There was a whole chapter dedicated to Rome.
But I think that was good because the Rome we know now is not the Rome that it was when Hannibal attacked them. The Roman Empire.
That we all imagine, right?
Yeah, the professional army, the badass fighters at the victory after victory. Yeah. That wasn't the Rome that Hannibal fought. But because of Hannibal, the Romans kept learning from him. Because before they had citizen militias where after the battle or the war, they'll go back to tending their farms. And that wasn't working out. So they created a professional army, more training, more advanced training. I think that's why it leans a lot towards Romans, creation and growth. I would believe a lot of the things that the Romans said about Hannibal because if it wasn't for him, I don't think they would have been
I think later Romans would give him a fair shake than the Romans at the time that he was attacking them.
Kind of like Erwin Rommel, right? He was an enemy of the U.S., but they learned a lot from him and they respected him.
Right? And I think you're right, Hannibal changed Rome in some very significant ways, made their military better, and with that better military, they conquered more of the world. They actually did develop their military commanders to lead an army, and that was very successful for them. And I think Rome, all throughout history, has always been able to adapt, and that was kind of their strongest asset, and they stopped adapting, and that was kind of their downfall. I read a Julius Caesar biography once. That's about the extent of my knowledge. But I think the Julius Caesar biography was very good that I read. I would highly recommend it to you, especially if you like Hannibal. You'll definitely like the Julius Caesar one because we have a lot more sources on Julius Caesar, and it's a lot more detailed about what he did and how he did it. It's very good. But this one with Hannibal, man, we are missing so many great details that would tell us why he did things and even how he did things. I feel like we gloss over a lot of things, not because the author did, but just simply because we don't have the information.
Yeah, even crossing the Alps. Just how he kept his elephants alive because they had to eat a lot, and when it's covered in snow and there's no food anywhere.
That was one thing. I can imagine people crossing the Alps and just persevering. But how do you get elephants across snowy Alps?
Oh, and this is one thing I didn't really know much about Carthage because I didn't really read up on them. They didn't really have a full-on professional army. They relied on mercenaries.
Yeah, because they were really rich, right? They were a trading empire. They had a lot of money, a lot of silver, and they were able to buy different mercenaries, which Hannibal was a good general of different disparate groups, and he's able to bring them all together and hold them together to some very difficult terrain, through some very difficult like sieges. And it was all super difficult. How did this guy do it? That's what I want to know. After reading this book, I was like, how? How did he do these things? The book is very good at telling you what he did, not necessarily how he did it. And then they talk about like how he fought the Romans, and all of the Roman battles are very detailed because the Romans were there. I'm sure the Romans all wrote it down, but they don't talk about the details of like the smaller skirmishes that he was in, and like how he convinced all of these small tribes to follow him as he was making his way through Spain, as he was making his way through Europe, and then down through Italy. There's huge gaps in like what he did and how he did it.
So we know money. He had a lot of money because of the mines in Spain.
Which he stole. We didn't steal, but he took, right? He just took it with him.
Over.
So again, like he's taking elephants across the Alps. He's also taking like buttloads of silver across the Alps, and then trusting those dudes that are carrying it.
I admit he had a lot of people that respected him because he always led from the front, so he had to trust his guys in the back. But sometimes he didn't, so he had his Carthaginians in the way back and people he didn't trust in the middle.
He knew how to position his soldiers on the battlefield, untrustworthy ones in the front, in the center, and then veterans in the back, pushing those guys forward.
Yep. Even if they thought about doing something, anywhere they turned, they wouldn't have made it far. So that was smart of Hannibal. But he just kept picking up mercenaries left and right. In Carthage and Africa and
which is
Spain,
good, but you constantly have to pay them, right? Or else they'll just leave. So he was constantly on the move. He could never settle down. And in Italy, that's dangerous because Rome can settle down. They have a huge... Rome is huge, right? This is their base. And if you can't settle down, you can't establish like trade lines, anything like that. He's constantly moving, defending different areas.
I think some people are pushing him, attack Rome now.
Yeah.
Take it over now. Now's the chance. And he held back.
He held back, but do you think he could have took Rome?
He could have at least scared them into giving something up.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Because he
like,
beat...
Not necessarily beat them, but they could have like paid a ransom or something.
Because they had nothing.
But it seemed even to the Carthaginians that the Romans had an unlimited supply of people. Because even in the First Punic War, they lost countless people and countless ships and every single time they came back. Which was crazy to Carthaginians. They could have swore they were going to give up, and they just simply didn't. And that was another like aspect of Rome that people just didn't understand or couldn't fully appreciate, is that they will just keep coming.
I was thinking about that earlier. They're like ants. They invade your kitchen, you kill them, but they just keep coming back and coming back.
You spray them with Lysol spray. You give them a hearty speech. You go tell your friends never to come back here.
You leave the dead right there as a warning.
Next day
they just get picked up and fresh recruits come in.
So another interesting thing about Hannibal that I didn't know, that I was fascinated to learn in this book, was the end of Hannibal's life.
Yeah, he became an advisor, right?
Yeah, he was like a rogue kind of like commander, like teaching different kings like how to fight different wars, like small skirmishes, how to build up defenses. Like it was so fascinating. Again, the idea is fascinating, but we don't have a lot of details. Man, I wish we had details about that time.
Yep.
Like he's just a world traveler at that point.
Yeah, I thought he just went into hiding.
Yeah, I thought he had like either died in combat or just went into hiding, and then his life would have been sad. But he actually lived to be like an old man. Hannibal ends up in Carthage after he loses against Scipio, and he gets kicked out basically by his own people because they're afraid he's going to take over.
Yeah.
And
it's a weird
then he ends up traveling throughout the Mediterranean, like I said, training different kingdoms and stuff like that. And that's what I took away from this.
Really smart.
Is that he was a smart dude in several situations. Although it did make it clear that he wasn't very politically savvy.
Yeah.
Which was made clear when he went back to Carthage and got booted out by his own people. I feel like if he was more like Caesar in that respect, he probably would have just took control of everything.
Or as soon as he hit Rome or Italy, like he formed alliances, but because of his lack of politics, he didn't really build them up good enough. He was just allowed to stay in their backyard pretty much. Yeah. One thing I learned was, because in the movies, other stuff was like, he's over there fighting. How come Carthage is not sending reinforcements like money, other things? They're just letting him fight with mercenaries and whatever he's got left. And I learned through this book that they did try, but because he didn't take over some of the ports or strategic points, Rome was blocking everything.
Carthage couldn't get
They controlled the waterways, everything.
I think he did get some supplies, like once or twice, a couple of times, but not minimal. As much as he needed.
Yeah. One thing I did hate about, not the book, but Hannibal, was he knew that he couldn't invade Rome or fully, attack them successfully because he didn't have siege equipment because they were fortified.
Right.
Dude, you have like 10 or 20 years. Build it. Learn. Buy them.
That's what I thought too.
God.
And you're in Italy, right? I'm sure you would have captured somebody,
Chopped
an
down
engineer or
trees.
something, some soldiers that could tell you like Roman secrets to build siege equipment. You're right. Build a fucking ladder for God's sakes. You know what I mean? Like you're right. Like some siege equipment would have been helpful. I don't know, but I think it was because again he like brought together different tribes of people. Like let's say he built like ladders and siege equipment. Now you got to train all these people to use it. They got to trust you to be able to use them correctly. And maybe Rome has defenses against siege equipment. You know what I mean? Maybe they have like trenches and whatnot. I don't know.
Would have been something. Yeah, he was up to the end. Honestly, one of the greatest minds, right? Great tactician.
Yeah. I walked away from this book thinking like Hannibal was one of the great tacticians in history. Also, I had imagined that Hannibal and Caesar were like around the same times. They're not. They're separated by a couple hundred years, I think.
Yeah.
But man, that was another great matchup that I would have loved to have seen. Hannibal versus Caesar.
Because Caesar was also unconventional. Hannibal was like, he created, what did he create? Like he used weather to his advantage.
Weather to his advantage, terrain to his advantage.
Yeah.
And, that's all things that Caesar would also implement later on. And Caesar simply wouldn't fight if it wasn't advantageous for him in some way, right? He would retreat, which I think a lot of Roman generals were like very...
they were all in.
Yeah, they had a huge ego. They would never retreat, which Caesar was like, I'll fight another day. It's totally fine. And maybe some of that carried through from Hannibal to Caesar over time. Because like I said, I get a good sense of Hannibal in this book and how he shaped Rome and their military. Yeah, it's fantastic. I like this book. If you're a fan of history, if you're a fan of like Roman and Carthaginian history and you want to learn more about Hannibal, definitely pick this book up. It's not very long. I think it's a huge book, but really only like 2/3 of it is the story. The last third of it is like the index.
All the resources.
All the sources and things like that. So definitely pick this book up. Would you recommend it?
Definitely. Because you also learn about his dad.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Hannibal Carna?
Oh, no, it's
Hannibal Barca?
I think it's
Hamilcar.
Hamilcar Barca.
Let us know in the comments if you read this book, if you thought we were right, or if you thought Abel was wrong. Let us know.
Yep.
Thanks for watching.
Preferably in a residential area. Should be played at high volume.